Hi, I'm Dean Stanberry, immediate past chair of IPMA's Global Board of Directors, and I want to welcome you all to our Wednesday webinar series. And while you're about it, if you can, go ahead and put in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. And just to let you know, the recording will be available for all those that are registered. You'll get an email on that. And in the meantime, you can send out on your social media this link so others can join in. So I want to welcome you today to our session, which is From Waste to Worth, Best Practices in Office Cleanouts. So this really touches on a couple of three different topics, including, circular economy, sustainability, and just best practices. So without further ado, let's go on to our next page here. I've introduced myself. But let me introduce Heidi Frazier, Head of Sustainability for Green Standards. Heidi.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. So a little bit about myself. I am Head of Sustainability for Green Standards. I have over 18 years of experience in the sustainability world. I started my career really cleaning up waste from the past. And the last 7 years of my career were spent at Steelcase, an office furniture manufacturer, working in a circular economy capacity from product design to production to end of life. And that's actually where I engaged Green Standards initially and started engaging on clients on end of use and how Green Standards can support them with existing assets and keeping those assets out of landfill. So really excited to be here with you today. As Dean said, we're going to be talking about some best practices in office cleanouts. And really just kind of want to start with setting the stage or the tone. We know there is a waste issue in the office furniture industry and in office cleanouts. It contributes a lot to waste, right? And so this figure you're seeing here is an extrapolated figure globally. It's around 80 million tons of office furniture are sent to landfills annually. That's like every other person on the planet throwing out a task chair. Again, so we know there's a waste issue and there's also a frequency issue. So post-pandemic, we're seeing office churns happen more frequently. Traditionally, it used to be every 10 years, and now we're seeing around 2 to 5 year life cycles. And so there's an extreme issue there. And there's some companies, like as you see pictured here, that we're doing business with that know there's a better way. And we truly believe that sustainable decommissioning is a better solution to save time, money, and waste. And we'll dive into a little bit deeper on what sustainable decommissioning is. But first, I want to introduce you to Green Standards. We have been around since 2009, and we truly are a global leader in sustainable decommissioning. And as you see here pictured on the left, there's all sorts of beneficiaries and nonprofits that we work with. And to date, we have over $40 million of in-kind charitable donations to nonprofit partners collectively with our clients. Also, 120,000 tons, we deal in tons and not pounds, have been diverted from landfill. So it's a pretty significant impact from both the community perspective and an environmental perspective. And we have a 98% diversion rate from landfill. So it's a pretty impressive track record. We deal, again, with Fortune 100, Fortune 500 clients all over the globe, traditionally enterprise level clients who have a portfolio location across the globe. And so we're working with 35 plus Fortune 100 companies to date. So I like to say we're hyper local, but global scale. And so traditionally we donate, resell, and recycle across a global network. We have over 25,000 nonprofit partners in our network, over 300 resellers, and over 500 vetted recyclers. We do all of that work for you. So we're going and getting those vetted partners to help support with distribution and resale, recycling, and donation of your no longer needed assets, keeping them in life for longer. We maximize the value of every asset. And what that really means is we take a waste hierarchy approach. And so we'll come in and help consult around reuse, which assets might have reuse potential. We all know not everything does, right? And so we can help talk to your design teams and strategize around your portfolio needs and where you might have reuse needs. That can help save costs and carbon emissions from embodied carbon savings and disposal emissions. And then we can help with the donation network. Like I said, we have a vast donation network globally, and we try to keep that footprint very local within a 30-mile radius, helping those nonprofit partners. So it's not just about the environmental impact, it's also a community impact. oftentimes those community partners don't have access to high-end furniture. And so we're giving them equitable access to these assets, removing that burden of having to purchase those assets and really getting them what they need so they can really focus on their true mission and calling. And then we have a resale network, like I said, over 300 partners in that resale network. And why that's important is it can bring money back into the project and offset some of those project costs. Some of your assets have value, and we're really good at innovative solutions like bundling and getting the most value we possibly can for your assets. And then where we can't find reuse, donation, resale networks, we will help with recycling. And so at least capturing value from those component parts through our vetted recycling network. We go and do that work for you. We vet the recyclers, make sure they're certified, and we try to focus on recyclers that have a high recovery rate, around 75 to 80% recovery. And you might be wondering what's in scope. So if we deal, like I said, with enterprise clients. And so if you take a Class A office building and rip the roof off and dump it upside down, anything that might come out is in scope for us. So you can see here pictured, you have refrigerators, IT, AV, high-end office furniture, all the way to the low-end, low-value items like kitchen, where we just had a project that we did for a client where we were able to resell all of their kitchen utensils. So we deal with pretty much anything that might come out of the building, carpet tiles, ceiling tiles, you name it. And really, I should focus too a little bit on the fact that we're coming in and doing all of the project management work for you. So we're from inception to completion of the project, we're vetting all of the vendors, making sure we're optimizing costs for vendor management. We're doing all of the project management, so all of the engagement with the nonprofit networks and the resale networks. We're actively connecting the dots of your assets to those end users. And I think that's something that Green Standards differentiates in. It's an active process, making sure all of those assets get to that end use and really removing the burden from facility managers on having to do all of that work. And then at the end of the project, we provide back a full holistic report out on all of the impacts. So community impact, environmental impact, and then we also share extreme transparency around line of sight of where every asset went. And we also help with liability requirements from a donation side of things so that you don't have to worry about any liability through donations. So we're going to jump in now to best practices and maybe why they're not standard practices and hopefully give you some learnings on what you can do differently in your next project.
Hey, Heidi, before we jump into that first one, there was a question that came in that said, what is the source of the 80 million tons of furniture to landfill?
Happy to answer that. So we know from an EPA estimate back in 2018, so it's a little outdated now, I'm sure it's much bigger, there's around 10 million tons of office furniture waste that goes to landfill every year in the US and Canada alone. And so what we did is we extrapolated out that number using World Bank data. So it's around 4% of municipal solid waste goes to landfill each year, according to the World Bank. And if we extrapolate that out to 2 billion tons of waste go to landfill globally, it's around 80 million tons. So that's where that number comes from.
And I see that came in from my friend Celeste Tell, who happens to be a subject matter expert on this stuff. So she'll be keeping us honest, I think, through the webinar.
Yeah.
Thank you, Celeste.
So we'll dive into the best practices. The first one is planning ahead. Obviously, that's easier said than done. I think we all know that. Facilities managers wear a lot of hats, and there's a lot of things flying at you at different angles, right? And so sometimes that can be challenging. And so here's just a couple of things of maybe what gets in the way. Obviously, lack of communication, lack of long-term facility strategy. Maybe you don't know what the strategy is for your portfolio, and then a lack of engagement. Dean, any feedback here on traditionally what might get in the way of planning ahead?
Oh, absolutely. I think start with the last bullet first, that stakeholder engagement. So for the FMs that are on the call, if anybody resonates with this scenario, give us a thumbs up in the chat. Quite often facility managers, being in operations, they don't necessarily get pulled into any of the projects where you might be doing construction or doing a closeout. There's other people in the organization, and they will put together a plan, including contracting, the resources to get the work done. In many cases, there may not be any specific requirements or in the scope of work for the demolition or deconstruction company on what happens to these assets. So there may be something that says, get it to the landfill and, let us know what you got rid of. But there's not always a lot of follow-up to see, did that actually happen? Is it trustworthy? So one of the strategies here is, again, working with leadership to make sure that you're part of that stakeholder group, but also to establish those contractual requirements early on. And it's not just in the demolition, but as we get further on here, we're going to talk about how do you put the requirements for reusable equipment and resources in your construction project so that you have a better opportunity for that reuse when you get to the demolition stage. So those are a couple of good ideas, I think, to make sure that it happens up front.
Thanks, Dean. So a couple of other tips and tricks. So obviously long-term corporate strategy, is there one? If there isn't one, ask for one and ask if you can be part of that. Look at budgeting, define goals, and obviously consider contingencies. There sometimes can be sensitive subjects like headcount reductions happening in office changes and moves. And so maybe there's NDAs that need to be signed, but ultimately facilities managers should be part of the conversation and they should be part of that corporate real estate strategy. So the second one is collaborating with key stakeholders. And what we mean by this is both internal and external stakeholders. So what gets in the way of this? Well, facilities managers may not be included in the conversation. To Dean's point, maybe there's conversations going on around the portfolio management and the facilities managers aren't being brought into those conversations. And so maybe there's a lack of executive sponsorship. Maybe there's no leadership, driving some of those conversations and that engagement. And often there's a lack of clear sustainability targets. I can tell you from my experience working in a really large organization, there's a lot of silos that build up across the different departments, and it's hard to know what's happening. The right hand doesn't often know what the left hand's doing. And from a sustainability perspective, your company might have large corporate sustainability targets that they're externally pushing out, but you may have no idea how that impacts you or your role. Anything else to add there, Dean?
Yeah, absolutely. The lack of clear sustainability targets. Many companies actually have operational sustainability targets, but when it comes to things like startup and shutdown on things, those are what I would call secondary or tertiary objectives. And so quite often those may not get clearly articulated in the sustainability plan. And again, that goes back up to the executive sponsorship. So whatever the organizational executive leadership has as a priority is usually what gets done. So they may articulate a few high-level objectives, and it's up to then the rest of the organization to put that into action. What does that mean in terms of documented procedures? You said scopes of work, establishing those clear targets, and then get that validation back with the executive team. This is what we put together. Does this satisfy your priorities? And make sure that you have that concurrence before you have to wait until the project is midway through and now you're trying to figure out whether you're meeting the objectives.
Yeah, that's a great segue. So some fixes or tips and tricks, again, on advocating for holistic planning, making sure you're part of those conversations, networking, connecting internally with your design and real estate team. What are their priorities? Does your design team have any priorities around reuse for cost savings efforts? And how do you help them in supporting that? Engaging with your sustainability team, to Dean's point, and maybe this looks like a regular cadence, whether it's quarterly or biannually, meeting with them to understand what their sustainability targets are and how you play a role in meeting those sustainability targets. And certainly office cleanouts definitely have an impact from both a waste and a carbon perspective. And so you should be engaging with your sustainability team to let them know what your plans are around your office cleanouts and how they can maybe support you in that. Educating yourself, so doing what you're doing today by educating in webinars and continuing to stay educated through IFMA. and engaging with partners like Green Standards. We can help. We can help come in and consult with your design team around reuse strategies. The earlier we're brought into the conversation, the more cost optimization we can have at supporting storage fees and cost reductions, double handling fees, best practices around palletization. We can help engage on all of those things up front to really save costs, optimize landfill diversion and time.
Securing. Yeah, I'm going to add one point on the education or best practices. This is such a fast-moving industry at this point. It is very hard to keep up. So it's a good idea to kind of keep in the back of your mind, who is either establishing or utilizing best practices like Green Standards. So if you know that, then you've got a source that you can reach out to. Because for most facility managers, doing a deconstruction project is not something they do every day, or maybe even every few years. Maybe one of those things that comes up. So it's good to lean on people that do it every day, so that you're not missing something, because the best practices probably changed from the last time you did it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dean. We can be a tool in your toolkit. Securing budget. So everyone's favorite topic, money. I think this is kind of the funny misconception that often comes up, and we hear it a lot around, no one has budget for office cleanouts. There's a lot of time and focus that goes into space design and new space layouts, and there's a big budget usually associated with that, but then no money set aside for what do you do with all those existing assets. And so there's some misconceptions around there that people don't realize that there's a cost associated with this, or they think that it's as simple as calling 1-800-GOT office junk and getting rid of everything for free. But we know the reality is that there are set costs to this, and setting aside budget is really important. Anything else on budget, Dean, that I might have missed?
Yeah, when you're thinking about what is the cost of doing it in a reusable, sustainable way. There's a lot of things that have to happen no matter which avenue you choose. So try to think of it incrementally. It's like, what is going to happen, whether it goes to the landfill or whether you're doing something else. That labor is going to have to come in and dismantle things. They're going to have to pack it up. They're going to have to sort it out. They're going to have to do all of those things. So what then is the difference to, doing a sustainable approach versus just throwing into the landfill? And if in some cases, if you can actually get some money back, you might find that there really isn't an extra cost. There may even be a cost reduction opportunity if you do it right and give yourself enough lead time to plan for it.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. So yeah, that's a great segue into my first bullet point here, is just starting with those hard costs, right? So there are costs associated with extracting all those assets from a space. And we know landfill isn't free, right? So there's disposal costs there. We know tipping fees are only going up exponentially across the world. And so there's hard costs associated with that, labor and logistics. And then your time spent on these projects should also be included in that budget. And one of the areas where Green Standards can really come in and support there is we're removing that time burden from facilities managers, and we're doing all of that work for you. And so you're freed up to do all of the many things where you're wearing all of those many hats, right? And so it's freeing up you from that time. And to Dean's point, we can really optimize those costs from a labor and logistics perspective. We go out to bid and get the best pricing for you from a labor and logistics perspective. And then from a resale and recycling perspective, we can bring money back into the project to help offset those costs that you wouldn't have if you were just going to a traditional landfill disposal. There's also hidden costs associated with this, right? So if you're dealing with a contractor that says they're going to do the right thing and they are helping you to recycle, but then there's no transparency and you don't actually know what happens to all of these assets, there's potential liability and risk that your company is assuming through that. And so making sure that the vendors that you're doing business with are legit and have transparency in their data and reporting is a really important topic. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then I think we're challenging everyone to really redefine value. When we talk about return on investment, it's not always about financial investment or financial return. Sometimes there's real value in supporting your local communities through in-kind donation, and there's certainly value in saving carbon and waste to the landfill, both from a material extraction perspective, right? If you're keeping those assets in use for longer, you don't have to go out and extract more materials to make new products. And also you're reducing the disposal emissions through the reuse potential. So there's a lot of optimization and cost there. This next piece is thinking bigger. So again, kind of removing some of those narrow focus on, we just need to get this stuff out of this building. We don't really care about how it happens. We're asking folks to think a little bit bigger there. And there's a few things that maybe come into play there. So what gets in the way of this? Well, obviously time. I think time is money for everyone. And we know facilities managers are always up against the clock from time perspective, especially if there was no planning involved in office cleanout work. It's traditionally something that's not top of mind. And so there's not a lot of time set aside to do this work. In fact, we help clients all the time with a very quick turnaround, but that's not traditionally how we like to do business. We like more time to plan. The longer we have to plan, the more donation, the more resale we can potentially get you, optimizing those costs. And then is it worth it? And whether or not that, what is there to think about? It's just an office clean out. So these are some misconceptions. Any other misconceptions around thinking bigger, Dean?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I guess you say, hidden items in here. When you think about a building, depending on its age, you may be dealing with, hazardous materials and abatement. If it's an old building, it's got asbestos in it, you're not going to just demolish that and throw it in the landfill. There's procedures. So you have to know that kind of stuff up front. Even just some of the utilities commissioning, you have things like lighting fixtures and other components that do require some sort of planning on where they're going to go and what they're going to do with them. And then you also have the opportunity for recyclable materials. If you're actually demolishing a building, you have things like, copper and aluminum and things like that have a residual market value that can put it back into reuse. So those are the biggies that I would come up with. And just that execution and monitoring, as Heidi said, green standards can take a lot of this off of your plate in terms of some of the detailed planning and monitoring. But if you're the person that's overall responsible for executing it, you have to have a larger project plan that you're managing and making sure that all the piece parts are being done. Just like a new construction project, there needs to be a project plan, and everybody wants to see it done on time, on budget, and with quality.
So some simple tricks to fix it. Well, obviously, your company probably has a waste policy. You may not be aware of it, but they probably do. They also probably have aggressive climate commitments, or maybe just sustainability targets that you should be aware of. Also community, how are you impacting your community? There's probably corporate strategies around that you should also be aware of. And then again, living those values. So just because you're going through an office cleanout doesn't mean you should divorce yourself from all of your climate commitments or corporate social values. They should be in play during an office cleanout too. And so thinking bigger about those strategies and how the work that you're doing during an office cleanout can actually support them in a positive way instead of in a negative way. And then again, always saving money. So optimizing those costs, saving money through reuse. You're obviously optimizing cost savings by reusing those assets potentially and not having to purchase new. So there's a lot of cost optimization that can be at play there if you're thinking on a bigger scale. And the last best practice we'll talk about today is reporting results. I mentioned Green Standards gives very transparent reporting back to clients around the whole project. We also can do that on a cumulative level. So if you're someone who has a portfolio across many locations all over the world, we can give you a report out on every project we touch, and that helps you with one-stop shop reporting. But we'll talk a little bit about, what are some misconceptions around the reporting process. Maybe you're not aware that your company has any ESG reporting or any reporting at all, but I assure you it's probably happening. And oftentimes we come in contact with clients who have traditionally never tracked this waste stream. And so it's often unknown and unmeasured and untracked. And, misconceptions around, is it even worth tracking? Again, to the first bullet, your company's probably doing some sort of reporting, and ESG reporting is only growing in scale and size. And so it is important to consider these metrics in office cleanouts. Dean, anything I might have missed there?
Yeah, on the documentation and reporting side, something to consider is, where is this information going to go after you get it? So many of in facility management, you may be using a CMMS maintenance management system, or an IWMS workplace management system. So what happens when you actually get rid of a building? Most of those records then get archived. They get kind of shoved. They don't get disappear, but they get shoved into the back room, not to be seen again. But what happens when you now need to report on this at the end of the year? Did you archive things that now you don't have immediate visibility to? So this becomes another item of data management that the commercial real estate industry is still trying to work out. How do we keep track of these things over time that we still need visibility to, even though that asset may no longer be part of our portfolio?
Thank you, Dean. That's a good point. So tips and tricks on reporting. So understanding your internal reporting requirements. Like I said, you may not be aware, but your company probably is doing some form of reporting. So getting together with your corporate real estate team, understanding what their reporting obligations are, your sustainability team, they're probably reporting to some sort of ESG report annually, and how these metrics can support that, either through waste diversion metrics. Maybe you have true zero waste certification program that you want to report through. There's all sorts of different reporting structures that may be occurring unbeknownst to you. And so just understanding what that is. Also, ensuring that your service providers deliver trustworthy data. Like I said, Green Standards really prides themselves on trustworthy and transparent data. We provide clients with a line of sight document detailing where every asset went after the project's over. And that helps really kind of build that trust with clients. And then back to the environmental reporting, all of our carbon data has been third-party verified and reviewed. And so that you can have assurance in some of that data as well. So just making sure that your service providers are delivering trustworthy data. And then another shout out to IFMA Resources. Matt Tucker has released a circular facilities manager report that I encourage everyone to go and explore. There's a lot of really good details and data in that as well. That can be a useful resource for you.
Yeah, thanks for that shameless plug. And I will put our production crew behind the scenes on the spot here, since we don't have it in the slide deck. Could you maybe put in on the screen or in the chat a link for people to find that report, because it is freely available on IFMA's website, but like most things, that you have to go search for it. So maybe we can help them out and give them a link to go directly to it.
Thanks, Dean. Anything else, Dean, before we wrap up the summary slide?
No, I think we kind of hit the high points as we went along. There may be some post-demolition activities. Again, this depends on the type of space that you're dealing with. When you get into something like manufacturing or other sites that may have had, different chemicals or things like that, do you have any environmental cleanup that you have to do? That all needs to be handled. So not everybody has to deal with that, but we, or facility managers, we manage all different types of properties and all different asset classes. And so chances are some of the people on the call may have some of those things to consider, and they need to put that into their plan as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I started my career doing environmental cleanup work, so I'm very well aware that can often come into play, right? And unbeknownst to you, there's maybe staining on the floor, something where you have to then do some due diligence on what we're dealing with from legacy contamination piece. So yeah, that's an important point. So take home slide, you can either screenshot this or take a picture. This will also be available after this webinar for everyone to re-engage with, but we want to just give you a take home piece that you can use. So the 5 points are listed here of planning ahead, reviewing long-term strategy, considering budget, defining goals, collaborating both internally and externally, being an advocate for that holistic planning, making sure you're networking internally with champions, and then engaging externally with service providers like Green Standards for support. Again, bringing us in early is the best way to optimize cost savings and landfill diversion. And then securing budget, obviously money has to be set aside for some of this work. There's the hard costs, and then there's also some cost savings potential there. So make sure you're setting aside budget for this work and correctly defining value. And then thinking bigger, so making sure you understand your corporate policies around waste and climate commitments and corporate social responsibility, and how do you potentially save money through reuse, and how do you support your local community. And then 5, reporting results. So making sure that you're getting the data from your service provider that can help with your own internal and external reporting, that data is transparent and accurate, and leveraging your resources like IFMA. So for more details on how you can engage Green Standards, we've managed thousands of projects successfully, and we're happy to help support. If you want to start that process with us, there's a QR code link at the bottom of this that you can link to. And then we also have a circular workplace report that I just wanted to kind of shout out. It's on our website. So if you go to that link, you'll see more information about that. And maybe Mark can put this in the chat as well. But we just recently reported in 2024 a who's who in the circular workplace. And we're building this circular workplace coalition where it's bringing together everyone who might touch workplace, right? So it goes to the original office manufacturers, to designers, to architects, to facilities managers, all the way across to the end of life service providers. And we're really trying to take what traditionally a linear economy, where you have the makers, the users, and then the waste providers on opposite ends. And we're just trying to connect those dots and make sure that everyone is talking and communicating and breaking down some of those silos that occur within our own industry, so that we can really start creating a circular workplace. And so the Who's Who report does a really great job of breaking down all of those roles, traditional roles, and where you can start supporting more circularity within your role. So we'll jump into questions and answers, and I'll just leave the screen up so that anyone who wants to potentially can take a screenshot.
And I just want to add to a little bit to what Heidi was saying there. I think we need to start with the end in mind. So going back to, construction and design, starting to think more about specifying, what types of materials that you want. What is its reusability at end of life? Are the components like furniture, is it designed and manufactured in order to be disassembled, to be not demolished, but deconstructed, and so that you can get those piece parts out of it and have that value? And that really, what we're talking about mostly today, and I believe that what Heidi and Green Standards does, is we have all these buildings that were built without any of that thought process. So now we have to try to figure out what to do with some of these things that weren't really designed to be deconstructed and reused. But it'll take another generation at least before we start seeing things that were designed with a little more forethought and how we can actually repurpose them at end of life.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dean. So one thing that Green Standards is doing from an industry-wide perspective is we're actually going in and chatting with office furniture manufacturers around their design, because we have this unique perspective of end of life, end of use, and so we can help them with more circular design. So whether that's, talking to them about what makes a product more donatable at end of life or resellable at end of life, and how do you potentially tweak some of your design strategies to enable that life cycle extension. So that's something we're also doing. We're working with BIFMA, the industry association, as well, on Circular Workplace Coalition, and really starting to engage. But you're right, it's going to take some time for those efforts to actually come to fruition. And in the meantime, we are dealing with complex products, a lot of materials that have a challenging end of life story. So that's a great point.
Yeah, I'll just make a plug for, there's another company out there called Repurposed Materials. It's repurposed materials, all one word.com. They will often take some of these hard to recycle or repurpose items, and they have some warehouse locations or locations around the country where they can bring them in and then make them available for people to reuse. They have some really interesting examples that they've done, like taking a tire from one of these big earth movers. These are tires that are like 10 foot tall, and they cut it like a bagel, and they put a liner in it, and they use it as a cattle watering trough. I mean, that's a reuse. Yeah. They take in a lot of sports fields have artificial turf. Well, that only has certain lifespan to it for sports purposes. So they roll it up, cut it up, roll it up, and then they'll take it in, and they find some other uses for that that doesn't need to be as pristine, as they like to have it on a high-end NFL stadium. So those are just some examples that I've seen them do. And so it's a company that's really trying to be part of that circular economy. But they're coming in at the end. They're saying, is this something that there might have another life for? And if there is, then they're interested in helping take it off your hands and make it available to somebody.
All right. Do you want to jump into some more questions? I don't see any popping up yet, but.
Well, I saw there's some that are over here for us. There was one that came in a little bit earlier that I think it had more to do with the budget, and is like, is there a square foot allowance or estimate? Is there a simple metric, for order of magnitude estimating that you might use to say for office building of X size, allow this much?
Yeah, that's a great question. So unfortunately, there's not an easy cut and paste answer to that. But I would say get engaged with us, because what we can do is run a quote process for you. But ultimately, it depends on a lot of things, right? There's a lot of moving parts there. So whether or not you're in a union labor area plays a role. The labor and logistics costs differ per region, right? So if you're in the heart of Manhattan, it might be a very different labor and logistics cost versus if you're in the country in Iowa. And so there's a lot of different variables at play there. But what we can do is we can kind of run through your project scope and better understand what your portfolio looks like and what your inventory might look like and your square footage, and run a quote proposal for you.
This is all interesting, but some companies already have like a relationship with like a local mover. Mm-hmm. Can you still help them avoid the use of the landfill, where there's maybe already some vendors involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we can do is, if you already have a move partner that you're engaged with or you already have a contract with, we can absolutely leverage them. What we try to do, and this is why it's important to bring us early into the conversation, we try to optimize costs through going out to bid for you on labor and logistics to really optimize that cost. But if you already have a preferred vendor, we absolutely can work with them.
Oh, this was a good one. The ever popular question, how much time do you need? So yeah. What is your ideal timeline? And then what is the shortest possible? Somebody come in and say, I need this done tomorrow. And you go, we're good, but not that good.
Yeah. So I can give you an anecdote actually over the holidays, but ideally 4 to 6 weeks. The earlier, the better, right? Because we can really help you optimize reuse within your portfolio. There's other assets of what we do that can actually be value added to you if you're bringing us in early to the conversation, like we discussed today. But 4 to 6 weeks is ideal. I can tell you we've done shorter. We did a turnaround within a weekend right before the holidays. So we can do shorter, but that's not ideal. Usually that involves double handling or some sort of storage piece. And so there's not a cost optimization if it's a shorter time frame. So the more planning you can do on the front end, the better, and the more money you are able to save.
Well, what about the resale? Are there like product types or categories that have sort of a better resale value and opportunity?
Yeah, so think traditional brand furniture. That usually has the best resale value. Task seating actually is really hot on the resale market. And so task seating can really hold its value and bring some money back into the project. I can say probably worst case scenario are workstations. Actually, they don't hold as much resale value or donatability. And so the best solution with workstations can traditionally be just recycling and recovering some of that metal content for rebate potential.
And to extend that question, what are the things that are maybe the most donatable? I remember in the 2008 economic downturn, there was a lot of companies went out of business. There was such a glut of used product that even the donation companies are going, we can't take it. We got no place to put it, and we got nobody that we can give it to. So,
Yeah.
what's that market like right now?
Yeah, so I think we're unique in the fact that we have such a vast network and we're adding to that network every day. And what it looks like on their end is like a shop front. So traditionally products that are really highly donatable, if you think about what's in your home, so it'd be soft seating, ancillary, coffee tables, stuff like that. But then we've also done a lot of desking and chairs to schools. So it just kind of depends on that nonprofit network. And where we can really help there is we push out all of the assets to that network and we allow the donation partners to cherry pick, meaning they can go in and select assets that they actually have a use for. And then we have a team, a really awesome team behind the scenes that is actively engaging those nonprofit partners, making sure they really can receive the donated items and coordinating all of that labor and logistics with them. And so that's kind of how our donation process works.
Okay. Another one here about, who pays for decommissioning, which I imagine there's quite a variety there depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, traditionally, when we say client, that's the end user, the company that has the office that they're decommissioning. And again, there's some hard costs are already discussed associated with that. So pulling assets out of the building and getting them to a disposal site has a hard set cost. Your time has a hard set cost. And so the sustainable decommissioning process is really no different in that regard, except we can optimize all of those pieces and then bring value back in from resale and recycling. So the client pays, and we work really hard with the client to provide a transparent proposal where all those costs are transparently laid out.
Yeah, we have one that came in. This is probably more for green standards specifically. Do you work primarily with large scale office facilities? And then what might be the smallest project or effort that you would even want to be engaged in? Is there a minimum and a maximum that you can get involved with?
Yeah, that's a great question, William. Thank you for that question. Traditionally, it's around 20,000 square feet. So primarily larger scale facilities. And really why that is the case is because it makes more economic sense for both parties, right? It's economies of scale. Smallest inventory, I can tell you that we're doing a lot of business with banks. And why that works is, again, the economies of scale piece. So it might be a small branch and there might be thousands of them globally that we're doing business with them. And so we can really optimize vendor management costs and fees associated with that. So traditionally large enterprise offices, but there is no cap there. So we've done small square footage, 20,000 square feet, all the way up to millions of square feet. So there's no cap to the scale and size.
Okay, we have another one, but I'm going to put that off for just a second here because I think I want to continue on with some of the others we had because it's along the same theme. Question about, do I need to palletize my own inventory?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So traditionally, you might think that this is actually a good move of consolidating and palletizing to get the assets out of a space. If you're cleaning out, again, this is where bringing green standards early into the process can really be value added, because we would encourage you not to do that. Once you palletize your inventory, it can be really difficult for us to come in and assess that inventory and assess the conditions. And so that limits our scope on what we can push out to our resale network or our nonprofit donation network. And so ideally, do not palletize the inventory before we come in and do your inventory process. Once that's done, then our labor and logistics partners can help with the palletization and getting those assets consolidated and packaged up for their end of life.
Yeah, you're really sort of inviting double work, right? You're increasing the amount of
Double
labor,
handling.
double handling.
Yeah, you might actually have to de-palletize stuff just to see like what condition are we talking about, because resellers need to know what condition those assets are in order to provide a price.
This is kind of along that same line, but what if it's already been moved into a warehouse?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do a lot of work in warehouses. Actually, we have some really large projects coming up right now where it's already been moved into a warehouse and potentially palletized. And so we can do that work, but again, it does limit the potential from a resale perspective. So there might be some, pulling off some of the packaging or palletization to understand what those conditions are in. Unless you already know that, then that's great. But yeah, we do warehouse cleanouts all the time. So that's something that we're pretty competent in.
And let me see if I can phrase this, correctly. This is coming from Dr. Hakan. Which innovative material management strategies can companies implement to minimize waste in office cleaning processes to integrate waste into the circular economy? So a little long there, but I think you get the gist of what the question is.
Yeah. So, I think, I guess, shameless plug, leveraging services like ours, we can help you with material management strategies. Ultimately, understanding, we'll come in and do a disposition strategy for you, right? So we'll help you understand what your inventory looks like and then give you a strategy based on your goals. So if you have a goal around, you don't want anything to be resold, you just want everything to be donated, we can help you there and prioritize donation network. If you want to bring as much money back into the project and don't care as much about the donation and community impact piece, we can help with that. And so I think that's answering your question, but I might be off. Ultimately, materials and inventory management is a really challenging subject. Not every asset has value in inventory, right? So you can come in and do an exhaustive inventory, but maybe only 20% of those assets actually have reuse potential. And so there's a lot of costs associated with exhaustive inventory and exhaustive material management. So there's definitely optimizations that can come into play there. And that's something that we help clients with regularly.
Yeah, and Dr. Hakan had a follow-up question here. I'm going to paraphrase this just a little bit, but it's about, are there measurement systems and international standards that should be used to reduce carbon footprint of waste disposal and material transportation in large-scale office cleanouts? So I guess it's the measurements and the international standards. What do we have and what applies?
Yeah, so new, hot off the press is the ISO international standards. There's, I think, 4 now that have been released that touch on sustainable design, circular design strategies, material management, so from a material chemistry perspective, and then all the way through measuring and monitoring circularity. And so I would point to the ISO standards that have been released if you're not familiar. There's, like I said, 4 of them, and there's probably some educational tools and tips out on the web too.
Yeah, without, we don't have to get into specific product names, but are you aware of any of the commercial products on the market today that incorporate some of the measurements for some of the waste management and things like that?
So I know a lot of the large office furniture manufacturers, the big players that we're connecting with through BIFMA, they are monitoring and measuring how much recycled content they're putting in products. So that's one measure. They also are looking at more reuse strategies. So a lot of them are leveraging services like green standards, and potentially in the future, it might look like us actually helping to capture those component parts and bring them back to them for remanufacturing purposes. We do a lot of business with remanufacturing partners to date, and so we're already doing a lot of that reverse logistics piece for remanufacturing. But as the question on a large scale, I think the ISO standards are going to really set the tone and the stage for the entire industry. Traditionally, there wasn't very clear metrics around circularity. And so the ISO standards are going to be probably something that they point back to now that sets the tone. I know the new BIFMA E3, BIFMA level standards are going to point to that, and several probably building and other product certification programs are.
So we may see some of our existing, technology providers out there starting to incorporate some of this, measurements and tracking into their existing tools that may not exist today.
Yeah, I think what the ISO standards can do is kind of just level set the language and how people are thinking about monitoring and measuring circularity. But traditionally, like I said, it's recycled content. And so taking, used materials and putting them back into your product is one measure. Durability, longevity is another measure. So if you look at some of the higher end office furniture suppliers, that's something they've been doing for years. They're making products that last, and that's why they have resale value on the resale market or donatability for donations.
Okay. There's another question here about, do you offer your services and resources in Canada?
Yes, we do. Actually, we are based in Canada. So absolutely. And then to our global focus, yes, we can provide our services globally. There's only a few countries where we wouldn't do business just from a socioeconomic perspective, but we really pride ourselves in being able to scale our services globally for enterprise level clients. So yes, Canada is definitely in scope.
And one last one here. I think Dr. Hakan has another question. It's a little more involved, so I'm going to maybe let you answer that one offline. Okay. We can always follow up and provide that.
Yeah, happy to.
The last question is just the basic, how do I get started? Now, before you dive into it, what I typically tell people is, sit down and kind of write out what are your requirements. What is it you need at the end, and start documenting that kind of stuff. So with that in mind, how do you describe to people what are the things that they should come to the table with in order to get started?
Yeah, so we put our website up. So there's an intake form on there, and there's several questions that asks. But some of those things are time frame. Do you know your time frame? We talked a lot about planning ahead and collaborating internally with stakeholders to understand your corporate strategy, your portfolio strategy. So understanding that can be really helpful. Are we talking a 3-month time frame, a 1-week time frame? Do you have budget? So setting aside some budget. Do you know if you need union labor, or what does your actual portfolio look like from an access perspective, egress and access, and that can help. So the intake form has all sorts of questions like that on there that will help you get started. And then we're happy to connect with you directly and walk you through that process as well. But you're exactly right, Dean. It's just kind of outlining what are your project goals, and understanding those can really help in that conversation.
I didn't mention this earlier, but this is maybe a good point. Many organizations do not have an inventory of their furniture products. And that really gets back to sort of a finance issue, meaning that if it's not a depreciating asset, finance doesn't care. So in other words, nobody cares about tracking it. But this is another, purpose where you may want to have some of that, because now you would actually have a much better idea of what you have available. You would be able to probably look at the inventory and say, well, how much of that is reusable, donatable, that kind of stuff. And it just doesn't exist in many organizations today because it's never been made a financial priority.
Yeah, so kind of go both ways on that, Dean. So ultimately, even if you have existing inventory, and traditionally our clients do have some level of awareness on their floor plans, and that's kind of what we work off of. But then we also will do a boots on the ground walkthrough to understand their inventory, and why having that inventory up front may not be as useful as you might think is there's all sorts of conditions that happen, right? The use, maybe that article has moved floors, or maybe it's now broken and you didn't know that, right? And so there's conditions reporting that has to happen boots on the ground, traditionally right before the project launches, so that we can get that information to the resale partner. So I kind of go both ways on that. Like I said, exhaustive inventory management and inventory tools don't always meet the mark for actually understanding your existing conditions at the end of life and during the decommission. And so we can really optimize cost by doing that right before the project to really help understand what those assets look like and what their next best use might look like.
All right, I'm going to throw you a curveball. I have one question for me. Being the techno geek that I am, is Green Standards using any AI capabilities at this point, for example, to take a floor plan and feed it into an AI-driven tool that can come back and give you like counts and some assessment of what's on that floor plan?
It's a really good question. So we're looking into some tools like that that might help with the walkthrough piece. Like I said, it doesn't always make sense to do an exhaustive inventory up front, and then 10 years down the road, you have no idea what actually has happened to that inventory. But we are looking at tools that can be leveraged during that boots on the ground walkthrough that can help identify assets quickly and turn that into a usable document that can help with the resale, donations, disposition strategy. So yeah, we're definitely doing some exploration there.
Okay, well, I think we're
to put a pin on that, though. At the end of the day, there's still very manual processes that are always going to have to be at play here. And I think, while leveraging AI is really exciting and sexy, it's probably not going to solve for all of our problems.
Yeah, today is the active word, because Boston Robotics is working on the little robot dogs that are going to be able to go around and do all that inventory for you. Well, that takes us to the end of our time. We had a lot of great discussion, a lot of good questions. I want to thank everyone for attending today. And again, this will be posted. You'll get the email, so you have the video recording. Can be shared with others. And so, and then again, we've got a couple of questions here that we will probably get answers to after the fact and send back out to people. So thank you very much. Thank you, Heidi, and thank you, Green Standards. And yeah, keep going. Keep up the good work. We need you.
Thank you.